Welcome to Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is the 2022 Lexus IS 500. This is the newest version of Lexus IS. They haven't changed anything really physically about this car since they did the facelift for 2021, but the biggest engine you could get at the time was the 3.5 liter V6, and now you can get this 5 liter V8 in the IS once again. Lexus did do the ISF many years ago. This is not necessarily an ISF, but it's as close as they could get with the budget and the resources that they had. So let's talk all about what this 2022 IS 500 is. Then we'll get it out on some back roads way the heck away from DC proper and see if it's any good to drive as a sports sedan. Now, while you're watching this video, if you like anything you're seeing, or at least something that you see, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button because that really helps us out with being seen on YouTube. You can also subscribe to our channel if you want to see more shenanigans with new cars like this Lexus, old cars on the racetrack, and everything in between. So thank you for all that support, and now with that, on to this Lexus. All right, so first things first, what matters really here is what's under the hood. Now, I mentioned this is not the first year for this last facelift of this IS. Body style and generation, Lexus redid this for the 2021 model year, but they only had a V6 in there, which for a lot of people is a totally fine engine. I actually liked it quite a bit in the IS 350 that I drove, but this IS 500 says, nope, 6 cylinders not enough, we're going to put a V8 in here. It is a 5 liter V8, it is naturally aspirated, it is a screamer of an engine, it makes 472 horsepower at the tippy top of the revs at 7,100 RPM, and it makes 395 pound-feet of torque. Still lower in the revs, but not like turbocharged torque. It's at about 4,800 RPM. So those are your power statistics. Now, what did Lexus have to do to fit the V8 under the hood of this car? Well, they had to raise the hood by 2 inches. So you'll notice the hood is a little differently shaped, a little differently sculpted than an IS 350. They also had to lengthen the fenders and the front bumper. So the entire front of this car is just a little bit resculpted to make that 5 liter V8 fit in there. Now that V8 sends all of its power only to the rear wheels. This is exclusively a rear-wheel drive car, which most people will say is to its benefit. You cannot get all-wheel drive with this car unless you get the IS 350. That power goes to the rear wheels only through an 8-speed torque converter automatic. It is not a dual clutch, it is a torque converter. It's the same transmission used in other V8 Lexus models, including the older ISF, the GSF, if you remember either of those, and the LS 460 back in the day. So they took the same 8-speed, it can handle the torque and the power of this 5 liter, and that's what they've got in here. Now, while we're up here at the front, you've also got functional brake ducting right here in the front of the bumper. That is nice to see. It flows more air directly to the brakes. You've also got these unique 19-inch Inky wheels. These are unique to the IS 500, and they save some unsprung weight. You save a pound up front and 2 pounds in the back. That doesn't sound like a lot, but unsprung weight is the enemy. That is, weight in general is the enemy, but that is the biggest enemy of any car making it handle. So nice to see some unique wheels up here on this car that can help reduce that unsprung weight. Now, with unsprung weight and sprung weight, you have to talk about suspension, and Lexus gives you a standard adaptive variable suspension on here. So you get adaptive dampers that can be stiffer or looser based on your drive mode settings. Lexus does say they only actually get stiffer in the Sport S Plus settings. So there's Comfort, Sport, Sport S Plus. You have to turn them all the way up to apparently feel them get very different. And then keeping everything going is a standard Torsen limited slip differential on this rear axle. That is, of course, great to see given this car is only rear-wheel drive and not all-wheel drive. I am not someone who thinks a performance car has to be all-wheel drive at this point. I might be a little unique among some of my peers, but having that Torsen limited slip really helps you, especially in cornering. It helps both wheels put down the same amount of power, even if one starts to slip a little bit. And then, of course, once you're going, you have to always be able to stop, and Lexus also upgraded the brakes on this car. The IS 500 has 14-inch front rotors. They're a 2-piece front rotor design, but they are 14 inches. They are upsized here. And then the back rotors are also upsized. They are a 12.7-inch rear rotor. And then the final thing you'll see at the rear of this car is the standard quad tip exhaust. You get 2 tips per side, they're stacked. It's evoking the ISF, except in this case, all 4 pipes are actually connected to something and functional. And of course, you've got a little trunk spoiler here on the back of the IS 500. It's, I think, more for looks than anything, but I'm sure there's a teeny little bit of downforce that some engineer somewhere will tell you it actually does help with. Now, a few more things before we get behind the wheel of this IS 500. Curb weight is another huge concern with any car. I mentioned unsprung weight, sprung weight, the whole thing. I care a ton about curb weight. This comes in among its peers pretty average for the segment. This weighs 3,891 pounds. And that is only 143 pounds more than the V6 IS 350. So they were able to add a bunch more horsepower, a bunch more torque, 2 more cylinders, and only add under 150 pounds. So that is pretty great. And that, of course, brings you to your power to weight ratio. That's how many pounds every horsepower has to drag around. And in this case, with the 5-liter V8, you're down to 8.24 pounds per horsepower. That is a very quick car on paper, but we have to see how it actually pans out in the real world. So we'll get to that. The final thing about all of this is price. This one is the more loaded of the 2 different variants of IS 500 you can get. This one has the Mark Levinson sound system, the upgraded headlights, a couple more things, and it comes in at about $62,670. So with all that, let's get behind the wheel of this 2022 Lexus IS 500 F Sport, and we'll see how it is on some back roads. All right, so driving the 2022 Lexus IS 500, before we get into like the twisty stuff, we're on some straighter, calmer roads to get to the fun roads. That's kind of how it goes around the DC metro area. We're here with a bunch of friends of mine and of Out Motorsports, doing kind of this fun back roads drive in this car because it really deserves to get, you know, out of the city, and might as well bring some friends with you. But a couple things worth mentioning before we talk about outright handling. When this car is in comfort mode and you're on highways or, you know, roads like this where you're just kind of driving in a more relaxed manner, it's really good at just being a Lexus, and that is to be quiet and calm and refined, and everything's just kind of just smooth and seamless, and it works. The seats are comfortable. The space in the front of the cabin is pretty good even for tall people. The back seat is, of course, as tight as any other Lexus IS, which is to say pretty tight unless you're, you know, on the shorter end of things. You do have touchscreen infotainment finally, so you do have the touch pad down here, but you don't have to use it. And you get Android Auto and CarPlay compatibility, so that is a nice touch. So with that, we're on our way to our fun roads, and we'll check back in when we get there. All right, so we've got a little bit of free road here. Let's talk about how this IS 500 handles back roads, twisty roads. So shifting wise, I thought the transmission shifted kind of slow when you were doing it yourself versus letting it shift for you. And it kind of does, but you can catch it in the right spot and it will actually shift quickly. Now, granted, I'm hitting these paddles and it's kind of doing its own thing. I can put it in manual mode and let it see what it'll do for me. The interesting thing, I think this car is soft, and not necessarily in a bad way. I think it's kind of soft in an entertaining way. It's willing to just kind of roll over, take a set, and then do what you want. And it's got some pretty good grip here. The steering does not have a ton of feel. It gets heavier, but I wouldn't say it's communicative. Chassis-wise, they added this Yamaha rear damper, which they don't talk about much in the press release, but it's this damper that runs horizontally. If you think of a shock absorber, it goes left to right across the back of the chassis, and it helps with chassis stiffness. So, very fascinating. As far as if you can feel it or not, I don't know, but it's absolutely, chassis feels pretty good. It feels composed, but it's certainly kind of soft. Power, of course, is of no real concern. You've got plenty of it, plenty of torque. The power does swell and build as you crest like 3,000 RPM. You know, your power peak is at 7,100, which is into the red line on this car. And you have to be willing to wind it out. If you look at the Audi S4, which is a pretty formidable competitor to this IS 500, the Audi makes like 100-something less horsepower and 33 pound-feet less torque, but it's a turbocharged engine, and it makes all of its torque at like 1,500 RPM. The Lexus makes all of its torque at 3,800, 4,800 RPM, somewhere up there, and it doesn't make its peak power until you're buried in the red line. So both of those cars actually have the same 0 to 60 time, because off the line, the Audi can just take it despite being down on horsepower by like 120 horsepower. It's just got all that torque from nothing. This car, by comparison, is more rewarding if you're willing to push it up to that red line, and it sounds so good doing it. I know it's more induction noise than exhaust, but it does sound just so nice. It's got plenty of grip, little bit of washout there. You can kick the tail. The traction control does a nice job. What is perhaps a little disappointing for me is a car like this. It's small, somewhat lightweight. I want to hoon. I don't want to hoon at super high speeds all the time. I want to do silly things like do a burnout, do a donut, whatever. The traction control won't let you. It will let you do one burnout in first gear from a stoplight, in theory. Not saying I've tried Lexus PR people, but it will let you do one of those, and then the traction control comes back on, it clamps you down and says, nope, no more fun, that's it. So you can't do silly stuff with this, which is kind of bothersome. I wish it would just let me turn off all the nannies and safety gear and just let me drive like a dingus all the time, but you can't. And the other thing, of course, is rolling down these hills, the brakes. The brakes are very good. They have good initial bite. They get a little wooden feeling once you get through that initial bite. They stop just fine. It's just not a ton of feel in the pedal, but they're plenty big. They can dissipate the heat. Not concerned about the braking performance of this car at all. It's still, thankfully, fairly lightweight. They've got plenty of brake on it. And I think, you know, you're generally pretty good unless you want to do, you know, track days or something, in which case, as with any new car, put better brake fluid in it just as a margin of safety. In general, you know, this is not the sharpest or the most competitive in the segment. You know, when you think of the M340i, the Audi S4, the Mercedes C-Class AMG, like there are other things that will be sharper and a little more precise and perhaps a little more nimble even. And this isn't necessarily it. You know, the transmission is imperfect. The chassis is well done, but still kind of soft. And that's all okay. I think this is just, I love the fact that Lexus has done it at all, because everything has kind of got this last gasp of the big displacement, crazy, you know, high horsepower, gas powered drivetrains before we see more performance hybrids, performance EVs, which are all going to be a different kind of fun, a whole bunch of fun, again, in a different way. So I really appreciate the fact that they're doing this, and it's a little different. It's a little out there. It's just goofy, and it's so damn charming in the process. It is not the best, but it is so fun. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2022 Lexus IS 500 F Sport. As always, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment right here on YouTube. We so appreciate all that support. You can also give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports. And if you'd like to join a community of fellow LGBT automotive enthusiasts, please head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole community over there, and we would love to get to know you. Until next time, please stay safe, be well, we'll see you again soon.